Okay, this video is chapter 18 from the book about how to prevent dementia. Here's the book, How to Prevent Dementia. And this chapter is about what are the most memorable things said in nutrition history. Okay, so let me go to that page here. Okay, starting out on the topic of carbohydrates, Dr. John McDougall. All healthy populations eat a starch-based diet. There are no exceptions. Starch makes you healthy because it's a polymer of glucose. Glucose is the best of the sugars, and it's wrapped in fiber, so it has low caloric density. It stretches your stomach. You get early satisfaction of hunger. Then it goes into your small intestine, and it takes time for the enzymes to peel the fiber off, so you get a slow, delayed release of glucose from the intestine into the blood, and it's like a slow energy release pill. Keeps your blood glucose in the normal zone a prolonged amount of time. You satisfy your hunger with the fewest calories. So you're skinny. All the starch-based populations are skinny. They're healthy. So I can tell you, I'm triple boarded. I've been a doctor over 30 years. The most important thing I ever learned in my entire college, med school, etc., and onward career about human health is that humans should eat a starch-based diet. And if they do that, it prevents the vast majority of diseases, okay? What more could you want than that? That's the most valuable thing you could understand. Also, when you think from that point of view, everything starts to make sense, which is nice. Before that, you'll hear this over here, this over there, but you can't put it together into a coherent rationale. Once you get starch-based diet, everything will make sense. Okay, Dennis Burkitt. He was the Irish doctor, Christian missionary to Africa, discovered Burkitt's lymphoma, then became in charge of over 1,000 hospitals and keeping track of the epidemiology of all the different diseases there. And what he saw was the people who continued to eat a Western diet, they had a low fiber intake. Like, the British, they're eating, jam and butter, okay, with processed bread. And they would be constipated, and they would have everything that goes with that. Abdominal pressure syndrome, the back pressure causing a hiatal hernia, gastroesophageal reflux, inguinal hernias, varicoceles, hemorrhoids, etc. Okay, so what Burkitt says, high fiber diets protect people from abdominal pressure syndrome. Brilliant. Okay, that's about half of abdominal disease. It's a lot of disease, easily prevented. Okay, Durian Ryder, he's a bicycle racer. He's, I think, out in Thailand and other places. And he says a lot of funny things, okay? He's not an academic scholar, but he's a smart guy. And I love, too, the way he makes fun of a lot of famous bogus nutrition types. And he says, sugar is the most powerful performance enhancer for your brain, your muscles, and your dong. Now, do I know for sure if that's always true? No, I don't. But I do know that having a little bit of, I know beet juice is great. I'll guzzle 32 ounces of beet juice and I can squat a lot more and I can give a better long lecture, etc. And it is true that there's a lot of famous athletes, and that's what they do. Like that Chptr guy who set the world record for marathon. I think he did it in less than 2 hours. He was putting lots of sugar into his tea before his long run. Okay, I wouldn't say that's a health food for a regular person with a predominantly sedentary lifestyle on a regular day, but for getting ramped up before a competition, you want your blood glucose higher for that. You want to be well hydrated for that. Okay, something said by me, fruits taste great but are less filling than starches. Okay, I'm just kidding around. I'm doing a paraphrase of that that old Miller Lite beer commercial. Tastes great, less filling. Okay. Here is Caldwell Esselstyn, and he says, no oil, not one drop. Moderation kills. You only see heart disease in the countries that eat a lot of meat and oils. Coronary artery disease is a foodborne illness. Coronary artery is a toothless tiger that need not ever exist. Yeah, that's brilliant, okay? So Caldwell Esselstyn is by far the best results in the world. The low-fat vegan diet is the only diet that's been shown to reverse heart disease, okay? So don't listen to all these nonsense promoters, paleo, keto, carnivore, and the Mediterranean diet is also a joke. They use it as an excuse for people to eat cheese and chicken and fish and nuts and oils. It's nonsense, okay? It's stupid. I call the Mediterranean diet the Antichrist of diets because it pretends to save people and it doesn't. Okay, Nathan Pritikin, he says, fat is bad. Oh, one last thing. Look at Esselstyn. What does he talk about? He talks about epidemiology. Epidemiology is very useful information for keeping people healthy, okay? And these nonsense promoters like Bart K, they say, oh, epidemiology is of no value because it can't prove causation. That's nonsense, okay? If you have a population like 1 billion out of 1 billion, Asians eating primarily rice-based diet, they're all skinny with no diabetes, That's pretty useful information, okay? All right, and then all the people in a country where they're eating lots of oils and meat and high-fat diets, tons and tons of prediabetes, diabetes, fatty liver, etc. Okay, Nathan Pritikin, he said fat is bad after an extensive review of the literature on dietary fat. And he also said things like it's impossible to be too low in fat. In studies with controlled diets, they found people who were eating less than 1% fat did very well. Okay, and it was predominantly omega-6 fats in that context. There's also been children who've had different types of diseases where they fed them very low-fat diets, and they've grown well and done well. I forget the exact percentage on those. I think it was in the ballpark of 1%. I'd have to re-look that up again. I'm talking about it in my lipid lectures, but it's incredibly low. Okay, if you're eating a routine plant-based diet, low-fat plant-based diet, you're going to end up probably with somewhere around 7 to 10% dietary fat and be just fine. Okay, when I say low-fat diet, I mean like 10% or less fat. If you look at the Mastering Diabetes guys, when they say low-fat diet, they mean 15% or less dietary calories from dietary fat. Okay, that's another reason why Chptr put his patients on a rice diet to minimize their dietary fat. Okay, when he was wanted to prevent hypertension. Okay, Royce, and also, okay, well, we'll come back. I got other quotes on that. Roy Swank, he looked at the epidemiology data in Norway, and he saw in the center of Norway where they had a lot of dairy and they ate lots of saturated fat, they had lots of multiple sclerosis. But in the coastal areas where they ate much less saturated fat, they had much less multiple sclerosis. The Chinese diet of mostly rice, let's say in the 1950s and 60s, Roy Swank, he's the best neurologist ever for multiple sclerosis. He went to China. He said they couldn't find any patients that had multiple sclerosis. Okay, it's a relatively common autoimmune neurologic disease. John McDougall, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. The higher the percentage of calories from fat, the more obesity that population will have. Jeff Nelson, he runs the Veg Source YouTube channel. He's a brilliant guy. He says the fat in nuts is also bad for blood flow. I thought that was kind of funny. The reason I say that is there's a lot of people trying to promote nuts, saying nuts are good for you, and I think it's kind of a big joke. It's fat. Nuts are like 80 to 90% fat. There's no way that the fat in nuts is magic, and all of a sudden, unlike other fat, it's not going to have a negative effect on blood flow. So he went through pretty extensive work to showing that nuts were bad for blood flow. He also did a good series of lectures on omega-3 fats and how the benefits of omega-3 fats are quite exaggerated. He has a funny video where he shows, the long-term sequelae of, all these paleo-keto carnivores after 60 years of age. They're all fat and sick. Predominantly, most of them are fat and sick. And also he says a lot of these vegans, are aging cognitively intact. Like if I look at McDougall, T. Colin Campbell, and Jeff Nelson himself, I don't know how old he is, but also at Caldwell Esselstyn. Caldwell Esselstyn's like 90 years. He's still mentally sharp. I can tell you, the vast majority of Americans, in my experience, after 60 years of age, they're cognitively slow by the time they're 60 years of age because their arteries are plugged up from their high-fat diets with the related, high sodium, hypertension, atherosclerosis, and whatnot. Okay, William Roberts. He says when you feed herbivores a high-fat diet, they all get atherosclerosis. Every single one of them, 100% of them. Humans are herbivores. Eggs are what you feed to an animal to cause atherosclerosis. Okay. So, people ask me, well, is it okay if I eat eggs? I go, well, if you want to keep your arteries open, it's not a good idea. So that was good. By the way, that lady who wrote the book about Fat, Sick, and Stressed, that's Catherine Reed. She talked about in research studies with mice, they'll often feed them a lot of MSG in the food to glutamate to get the mice to become obese. That gets an animal addicted to food. They'll eat more. They'll also eat more of a food when it's salted. Okay. Michael Brownlee, he's the guy who wrote the magnificent paper on diabetes. Best paper ever written on diabetes. He says excess dietary fat causes a reversal of electron transport in mitochondria, and this causes insulin resistance. That's an awesome paper called Unifying Theory of Diabetic Complications. Okay, Gerald Sheldman, MD, PhD. He was working with nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, and he has confirmed that excess fat in skeletal muscle is the first detectable finding of insulin resistance, and it is the main cause of insulin resistance. And he calls this the ectopic fat theory of diabetes. Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, we already knew dietary fat was the main cause of diabetes going back to J. Shirley Sweeney from 1927. And then there's a whole bunch of other papers saying basically the same thing. Hemsworth paper, Rabinowitz paper, and other ones. But that's rather impressive that you can show it inside the cell with those modern techniques. My statement along these lines is there's no such thing as good fats except secret fat. Fiber is good fat. Fiber is safe fat because unlike the other fats, fiber protects you from leaky gut. The gut bacteria, they take the fiber and they convert it into short-chain fatty acids, and in particular the butyrate 4-carbon fatty acid is used to maintain the tight junctions of the enterocytes, the intestinal lining cells. So the fiber fat, if you will, it gets to your colon, doesn't cause any problems, protects your gut. Whereas the other types of fat and high-fat diets are associated with a relative lack of fiber, with causing a relative promotion of the bad bacteria, leading to increased risk of leaky gut and autoimmune disease, intestinal inflammation, and discomfort. Okay, now on the topic of protein. T. Colin Campbell, animal protein is the most powerful tumor promoter, like casein. And you think, what's the point of milk and milk proteins, casein whey, is to make the animal, the calf, the cow, grow super fast. So humans don't normally drink animal protein, don't have much animal protein. No animal drinks milk after it's weaned. They don't normally have much animal protein in their diet. So it's not now normal for humans to have that. And that accelerated growth can activate mTOR and increase the risk of cancer progression. Walter Chptr wanted low-protein diets. A lot of his patients had kidney failure, and he's trying to protect the kidneys. That's why he also gave them rice. Rice is about 7 or 8% protein, which is relatively low protein. By comparison, let's say fish, salmon, 50% protein, 15% fat. 50-50. 50% protein, 50% fat. Okay, so he's protecting the kidneys by lowering the amount of dietary protein, especially no animal protein. James Mitchell, he was a Harvard researcher. He died kind of young. He said that less protein an animal eats, the longer it lives. And he felt that this was true for humans based on what he knew about them. And he also felt, in his opinion, it didn't even matter if it was animal protein or plant protein. He just said the lower the protein intake, the better. All right. Leonard Hayflick was a microbiologist working with human tissue cultures. And he noticed that human somatic cells, meaning non-germ cells, non-stem cells, they can only divide about 70 times before they die, and that's called the Hayflick limit. So the point was, if you're eating something like animal protein, which is going to accelerate the rate at which cells replicate, they're going to more quickly arrive at the Hayflick limit and die. So what the Hayflick limit is about is that these human body cells, somatic cells, every time they divide, the chromosomes shorten a little bit because the DNA polymerase, it can't run at the end of a chromosome. So as a chromosome keeps shortening, eventually it shortens into genes that cell needs to live. And that's called reaching the Hayflick limit, and then it'll die. So the point is, you don't want to speed things up that accelerate you towards the Hayflick limit. You're 20 years old, you might want more activation of mTOR to build your muscles a little faster. When you're older, you don't want that. It could potentially accelerate cancer growth and accelerate your rate of aging. Okay, Dean Ornish. His research showed that plant-based diet and stress management techniques help to maintain telomeres. And this slows down aging. A telomere is kind of like the tip of a shoelace, where it's got that plastic wrap tight around it. And they'll be kind of long in a cell that'll give it more life so that it's not going to get shortened into important genes. Okay, my quote here, animal protein is more leucine and methionine than plant protein. Animal foods are also high in fat and iron. All of these things activate mTOR. So mTOR causes accelerated rates of cell replication. And when you speed up cell replication, you're speeding up the arrival of the Hayflick limit, and you speed up aging, and you increase cancer growth. So this is another reason why, like I said, I recently had a debate with that Bart K guy, and what he says is ridiculous. He recommends a 100% animal food diet with 0 plant foods and 0 carbohydrates. That's insane, okay? You're going to be causing a lot of insulin resistance and activating all these things you don't want related to increasing atherosclerosis, increasing mTOR. You're going to increase your risk of cancer. And Dr. McDougall's gone through all these papers that, the low-fat paleo-carnivore eaters, in every single study, they always die sooner. It worsens outcomes. All right, Chef AJ quotes on weight loss. Eat your veggies first. If it's in your house, so if you eat your veggies first, you fill up your stomach and stretch it for early satisfaction of hunger with low caloric density. So, caloric density, she emphasizes, is the key to weight loss. If you eat a low caloric density diet, you're going to lose weight. If it's in your house, it's in your mouth. Yeah, once you decide to go low-fat vegan, you need to get that other junk food out of your house if possible. You got to work with your family to get them to agree to that. Okay, then she says the key to weight loss is to eat low caloric density foods like vegetables and starches. Okay, the next quote here is from Richard Moore. He wrote the best book ever written about hypertension called The High Blood Pressure Solution. And he talks about hypertension in black people. Like, when I was in med school and residency, we were kind of taught, oh, well, black people got tons of hypertension, and we think it's genetic. It's probably salt sensitivity because the hot climate in Africa, and it's really sad. There's nothing you could do. You walk through a dialysis unit, and you'll typically see lots of young black guys all in kidney failure from hypertension, okay? And so what I'm saying is, here's what Richard Moore says. No, that's not true. Well, first of all, there's a paper, 1929 in Lancet Journal. Author's name is Donison, 1,800 consecutive admissions, and there was no hypertension in any patient in Kenya, okay? Because they're eating plant-based diets, okay? And then in the United States, according to Richard Moore, the blacks were not eating any more sodium than other populations were. In fact, they were eating less sodium than some populations. What was unique about their diet was they were eating very low potassium. And potassium is a vasodilator. It's the counterweight to sodium. So that was the main reason they had so much hypertension. So there it is. P for potassium, P for plants. You also get magnesium from plants, and that's an important vasodilator as well. And you need that to run your plasma membrane, sodium, potassium, ATPase pumps, and those also help to prevent hypertension. So you get the good stuff from plants. You also get the nitrate precursors from the plants. Okay, those are used to make systemic nitric oxide. All right, next quote is, what else did Richard Moore say? He says, in populations who eat a plant-based diet, they have the same blood pressure in their teens and in their 70s. Yeah, that's been shown repeatedly. We're not supposed to become hypertensive. We're not supposed to trash the elastic fibers in our ascending thoracic aorta. Okay, John McDougall quote. The most common cause of autoimmune disease is leaky gut. The body is always trying to heal. So what he's saying there is, just let your body heal. Don't do stuff that slows down healing. And I would look at that as, if you're capable of 2 steps of progress in healing every day, if you don't do anything bad, you can get 2 steps a day. But if you do stuff bad, you'll knock yourself down 1 step. If you do a lot of bad habits, you knock yourself down 2 steps, and you'll never heal. Okay, the body's always trying to heal. Yeah, just get out of its way. Get your sleep, get your good food, etc. Dean Ornish, vegetarian diet and stress management enabled men with biopsy-proven low-grade prostate cancer to lower their PSA, or at least keep it from increasing. So this is in low-grade prostate cancer. The patients who went vegetarian or vegan and got some exercise and some stress management, they all held their PSAs or lowered them, whereas the populations that just continued, same as before, so-called watchful waiting, they tended to increase their PSAs and had to go on to more invasive treatments like a surgery or radiation therapy, for example. Okay, Ruth Heidrich. The most common cause of disease is ignorance. It only took me 2 hours to become a vegan after talking to Dr. McDougall. Okay, so yeah, basically, smart person, it's pretty obvious. There's your chance to regain your health. Why wouldn't you do it? And most people are sick just because they're ignoramuses. They make themselves sick. The old story that most men dig their own grave with a knife and a fork from eating too much meat. Okay, and oils are, tremendous. Dr. McDougall says the 2 major poisons are animal foods and oils. Okay. All right, let's see. This doctor here, she says that you aren't sick because you have cancer. You have cancer because you are sick. You need to learn God's way of healing, which is a vegan diet, Christian prayer, and an attitude of gratitude. She says you have to follow all the 10 commandments, because when you follow all the 10 commandments, that's God's way, and then it activates, I think it was a quote from Deuteronomy, and Exodus, I am the Lord God who heals you. Okay, and I can tell you, she survived metastatic cancer, breast cancer, for about 30 years, okay? A pretty smart lady. She was an orthopedic surgeon. Jack Delatorre, chronic cerebral hypoperfusion, mouse equivalence is the most common cause of dementia. This is an incredibly useful way to understand dementia. He's a guy who was tying off the carotid arteries in mice and then seeing that middle-aged and older mice would become demented about 2 months later. And he did autopsies on their brain. There was no stroke. There was just same-side atrophy. And so the reason that was such a great thing is he repeated it in 20 different ways, and it got people to start thinking about dementia in a new way besides all the beta amyloid stuff. The beta amyloid is really a minor component of dementia, and it distracts and confuses everybody. So it set back dementia research by about 40 years. Okay, Peter Rogers, MD, on dementia. Neurovascular uncoupling, meaning a mismatch between oxygen delivery and neuron metabolic rate, is the most common cause of dementia. And Delatorre theory is, in a sense, a subset of this. And this is really an expanded version of the calcium hypothesis. And the reason why I claim credit for it is because, you previously would have researchers who would identify one tiny part of the whole process of what is called excitotoxicity. That means overactivation of a neuron such that its activity level gets too high compared to its blood supply, and then the neuron dies. It dies slowly through apoptosis. Apoptosis, like in Greek, means the falling off of a leaf. And the point being is sudden death of a neuron, called necrosis, is when you have a big arterial occlusion, no blood supply, neurons all die suddenly like that. Big mess on MRI. You can point it with your finger. There is a stroke, okay? Versus apoptosis, it's gradual, slow recycling of the cells, whereby their internal organelles and components can be recycled, taken up by microglia and delivered somewhere else. And you don't see that at autopsy. You don't see it at MRI. You just see a relative lack of cells, neurons in the brain in a location at autopsy. And on an MRI of the brain, you just see atrophy. So my point is, there's tons of things that uncouple metabolic rate and oxygen and glucose delivery. Anything that's increasing that metabolic rate without compensatory increase in oxygen and glucose delivery is going to increase in your risk of those neurons die. And because I know nutrition and toxicology and some other things, I was able to put it all together. So any mitochondrial inhibitor is going to cause the same thing. Any SERCA inhibitor is going to cause the same thing. Any plasma membrane calcium ATPase inhibitor is going to cause the same thing. All roads lead to Rome. All roads lead to increased cytoplasm calcium, causing overactivation of the cell. And things like caffeine are totally stupid because it's a vasoconstrictor. It drops oxygen and glucose delivery to the brain while simultaneously increasing glutamate transmission. So it's ramping up the metabolic rate of your neurons. Bad combination. And if you superimpose that on sleep deprivation and psychological stress, things that increase psychological stress, you're getting out of whack, if you will. You're having uncoupling of your neuron's metabolic rate from its oxygen and glucose delivery, and that's going to increase the risk that cells die. And like I said, there's tons of things that will inhibit mitochondria. Also, I figured out that there were some papers in the 1980s about ischemia, lack of blood supply, causing some degeneration of lumbar spines. But I figured out from looking at many, many thousands of spines, it's not just a little bit of ischemia causing degenerative disc disease in the spine. It's everything in the spine. When the disc fails, there's compensatory growth of osteophytes leading to diffuse idiopathic skeletal hyperostosis, interbody fusion, calcification off the disc space, calcification of the posterior disc, ossification of the posterior longitudinal ligament. And I'm just telling you, look at the papers. When I was a young doctor in the 1990s, the papers would say, oh, DISH is a rare condition, and OPL is a rare condition, mostly seen in some subsets of Asian populations. That's absolute nonsense. I see DISH and OPLL all day long, every day, multiple times per day. Okay, it's ubiquitous in American populations, because they eat the westernized diet causing tissue ischemia. And F- is also contributing. You can get fluorosis of the spine. GP is contributing too because it damages collagen. That's a topic for another day, but both of those things can also cause autoimmune disease. Okay, and I guess that's all. That's it, huh? Or let's see. Oh, what else did I say here? Oh, I said that the healthiest way to live is like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. And the average person is happy that they're not as fat as their cousin, but those are low standards. Better to try to be as healthy as you can, then you'll be the best that you can be. Because if you just try not to be as fat as your cousin, you'll be better off than your cousin, but quite often not by much. Okay, so anyways, hope that was helpful.